I'll just do a quick introduction and pass it on to you. So, Courtney Dunn is from Zoo Life TV, and Courtney's going to talk about wild online, why digital conservation education matters. So, again, as Courtney's talking, please post questions in the chat, comments, any thoughts that you might have that we can use to guide the conversation. So, with that, so over to you, Courtney.
Thank you so much. And I will state, because I am in VR right now, any questions, if I can have a moderator read off to me, they don't necessarily have to wait until the end. If anything pops up in the middle, feel free to interrupt me, or we can just do them at the end. I have no preference. It's just a little difficult to see all you guys in this mode. So, yes, my name is Courtney Dunn. My pronouns are they, them. Just as a visual description of me, I am currently a green anthro tiger. I have a little floating cartoon sea dragon friend next to me, and I am in a virtual aquarium right now. And yes, just as a comment, which we'll get into later, this is actually my body moving. This is not pre-animated. I'm actually doing some squats right now as I talk, and can even I can't lift up my leg high enough to show you guys right now, but this actually is me. This is not pre-recorded or animated. This is all body tracking. And what I'm going to be talking about today is digital conservation education, or I guess a better way of saying it would be virtual conservation education. And I'm just going to share my screen real quick here. All right. Switch over to where I can control it. So today we're going to be talking about why exactly it matters. You may notice it doesn't say a story by Courtney Dunn. Dr. Wildlife is what I go by in the science communication world online. It's what this character is called. And my pronouns are they, them. Now, for this presentation, you could also say that it is also called My Descent into the Weirdest Places of the Internet, an unexpected descent into the internet, because that's exactly what this is and how I got to where I am today. But of course, to start out, we should address the elephant in the room. Why am I a green tiger? There's a long story to that. But first, let's talk about exactly who I am in the real world. So I am a zoologist or conservation biologist by degree. I've been working in the zoo and aquarium world for about 14 years now. I've also taught at universities. And most recently, I am the product operations manager for Zoo Life TV. I love this photo of me. This is quite an old photo. I have much shorter hair now and a few septum piercings. Gained a little weight during the pandemic, but overall, that's me as human me. Now, of course, I didn't always look like that. Everybody has beginnings. This is little old me petting a duck that for some reason my dad is handling using giant work gloves as if that duck is a vicious, vicious animal that could attack at any point. I'm guessing we were probably working on something in our at our farm when he picked up this duck for me to pet, but I still think it's a really funny photo. Now, I grew up in the middle of nowhere in rural Arkansas, basically down a dirt road, living in a double-wide trailer. And because I lived on a farm, I was exposed to animals quite a bit. We also lived in the middle of nowhere, so we had like our forest and a lot of native species that were always around me. So I always had this connection to the wild world and was inspired to care about animals very, very early on. Other than that, there really wasn't much for me to see. When it comes to conservation education or zoological education, there was a lot of challenges for me. And not just me in particular. This applies to a lot of people or kids, students living in rural areas of the world. There's always the issue of traveling the distance to and from a zoo, aquarium, or museum. You guys don't know much about Arkansas. There's only one accredited zoo in the area. And despite it being a small state, it's probably about 2-hour drive from where I went to school. And although that may not seem like much, especially for those that live in cities like myself now, that's 2 hours without traffic. So it's quite a bit of distance. And when you're talking about that distance, there's a big financial cost of travel. Obviously, gas was much cheaper back then, but still, it was very expensive to go to and from. And because of like the remoteness of where I lived and all those rural students along with me lived, just the general awareness of the opportunities that zoos, aquariums, and museums present really wasn't there. So there was a lot of challenges for me to stay connected to the zoo and aquarium world. I was very lucky that my parents were very supportive of like my early fascination in this world, and they did take as many opportunities for me as possible to visit these places. But not every rural kid has that chance or has parents that can afford to help them travel. Now, I I love this photo because I just want to reiterate the distance was so much. As kind of a skip ahead in time for me, as I was working on my zoological career early on in university, I actually had to travel about 3 hours away to the Memphis Zoo for my internship every weekend, or as I like to call the Great Tiger Trek of 1998. Obviously, I wasn't doing my internship in 1998, but that was one of my first visits to the Memphis Zoo that kind of sparked the beginning of my interest in doing an internship there. But even though zoos, aquariums, and museums weren't really close to me, I still had the handy dandy antenna on top of our trailer that gave me access to PBS and a few other basic cable channels. And as I say, this kind of introduced me to doing the things that animals do, as the wild krat said, or Zaboomafoo said. Gave me an introduction to some amazing science communicators of their age, conservation educators such as the wild krats, who are still active today, and of course Bill Nye. And last but not least, I don't have a picture up here, but I'm sure everybody can remember Eyewitness and the catchy little jingle that has recently become active on TikTok once again. But thankfully, that little antenna, even though it didn't have many channels, at least gave me access to these science educators and really got me interested in the world of not only caring for animals, but trying to inspire people to care as much as I did. And of course comes the birth of the internet. Now, the internet had been around for a while, but it took quite some time for my family to get what you call the family computer. And it was an old Dell computer with a giant monitor, giant tower, and of course the stereotypical dial-up sounds that took, I feel like, 5 to 10 minutes to even connect to the internet. There was no way to silence it. It was incredibly loud, but it got you there. And when I first had access to the internet, things like Ask Jeeves and Carta Encyclopedia, things like that, were the big contenders for introducing me to topics that I couldn't find in my school books. Once again, this was rural Arkansas. Science wasn't very touched on in my schools, and I didn't really have much access to libraries. So the internet was a game changer for me. And of course, as Google grew, so did my interest in researching things there myself. And when YouTube came, gosh, that was the game changer, right? You were seeing people make content all the time about topics that they cared about. Things were suddenly even more at your fingertips than ever before. Fast forward into my 20s. I have always been a very big nerd. Very big nerd. I mean, who would have guessed? And I had found an interest in cosplaying at children's hospitals. While I was cosplaying at children's hospitals, Guardians of the Galaxy came out. And you guys can probably guess where this is coming to. I really love the Rocket Raccoon character, and I wanted a Rocket Raccoon costume to be able to go to these hospitals and show kids that Rocket is alive and well and give them a chance to meet one of their favorite characters. And of course, there's me typing on the internet. How do I get a Rocket Raccoon costume? And I hear about this thing called fursuit makers. I'm sure there's some people being like, oh gosh, this is where it's going. I'm like, what are fursuit makers? And then I see there's a whole world of people that are interested in animal-based movies, comics, all sorts of stuff. And I'm like, oh my gosh, my people. I love things like The Lion King and such. I didn't even know this existed. And keep in mind, I'm sure some of you heard about this fandom really, really early on. But for me, this was my first introduction to it at the age of like 23 or 24. And I kept like reading about this culture and, of course, diving more into the world of the internet. And I like to say there's an internet ecosystem out there. There's obviously a few different categories than this. This is just kind of oversimplifying it, but you got your internet geeks, you got your non-science folks. Of course, you have your science folks as well. You guys are proof of that. And then, of course, you have the fandom-based subcultures that rely on the internet to stay connected. And it was this fandom-based subcultures that I really, really got interested in. So I started doing some digging, and I realized, my gosh, there was a whole community of people interested in learning about animals, learning about their conservation, and caring about how to protect them, but no one was engaging with them. People were letting stereotypes take over their minds of what these people were like. And what I found was their conventions raising hundreds of thousands of dollars for charity, whether it is service dogs, whether it is taking dogs to libraries for kids to practice their literacy skills, big cat sanctuaries, conservation out in the field. They were raising tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars for animals, but no one was engaging with them. So I found my little niche in this internet ecosystem, and Dr. Wildlife was born. Now, I love this art piece because it's probably one of my favorites, showing some cute little frogs. And of course, I know herpetologist isn't going to be using a magnifying glass to look at frogs, but let's just play into the little idea for a little bit. Makes for a cute art piece. So I started seeing there was a niche to fill for educating a very tremendous group of people interested in animals and their conservation. So I took on this internet persona known as Dr. Wildlife. I created this little green cartoon tiger and started into the world of educating everybody in these fandom-based subcultures. Some things that I started doing, I was doing daily posting of updates from the zoo I worked at. I worked in person at zoos up until November. So I would do daily posting of life of a zookeeper, life of a zoological manager. Look what goes into all of this. Look at the life support systems. Introducing people to things behind the scenes that they normally do not see, as well as talking about conservation issues I care about. Engaging with science Twitter, the great worm debate of a few years ago, for example. We won't get into that because I'm sure that's a touchy subject for some people. And of course, I started venturing into the world of YouTube. I had taught zoology at 2 different universities, so I had this whole wealth of curriculum. And I decided, why don't I make a YouTube series where every video is a different class? And I started my journey into YouTube with that, to tremendous success. And of course, Twitch. Twitch is a recent thing for me, probably about a year ago, 2 years ago, started in the middle of the pandemic. And these were lecture-based class where I had direct interaction through the chat. I also would host guest speaker seminars and educational games. And to give you guys a taste of what that looks like and just how strange that I have taken it on Twitch, I have some videos.
Hey, you. Yeah, you. I'm talking to you. Do you like frogs? Do you want to learn how to like snakes? Maybe just a little bit more than you already do? Or are you just perplexed about the idea that we, well, not this green tiger, but we humans evolved from fish? Join me for my weekly herpetology class starting tonight on Twitch at 7 p.m. Eastern. This class will be occurring on a weekly basis every Wednesday night at the same time. Tonight, I'll be introducing you to the topics of evolution, taxonomy, and more, all while focusing on how today's modern reptiles and amphibians came to be. Hope to see you there.
Living organisms, yeah. Oh. Oh my god, I was so confused. I forgot I put that as a channel reward.
Something really important from all of these things that I did was that I realized education doesn't have to be complicated or dry. You can make it as entertaining as you'd like. And I think it is this entertainment that really captures people, especially on the internet. And of course, I'm not the only one that has taken this strange internet animal approach. There's someone who some of you guys may know. This is Chisei. Chisei is actually one of the main scientists for the Moderna vaccine. And yes, she is an animal creature on the internet, just like me. And it's been really funny because you'll see people be like, oh my gosh, I got the Moderna vaccine and it was made by a furry. Am I going to turn into an animal? But she's taken this in stride. She's really built up a big following using her strange way of science communication and introducing people to COVID care and vaccines through it. Erin Fairweather, aka Intobird, is another lovely science communicator that uses animals, specifically a griffin that is obsessed with bugs, teach about their specific world, which is entomology. And of course, one of the biggest things about this is that the virtual realm essentially has no limits. You can do things like host a Zoom class inside of a virtual aquarium. I'll just take the camera here. You can kind of see all the fish and stuff behind me. If we have time later, I can show more of it. I've been able to basically build virtual zoos. That's what that anteater photo is from. That's actually a 3D model where I've walked people through the process of planning zoological habitats in video games. And essentially, this traction has kind of grown substantially. This photo that you're seeing here is actually from an in-person panel that I hosted at a convention back in March. This class was actually something that I like to call drunk zoology. I basically teach a whole class of panelists who, obviously it's 18 plus, and the panelists are having little sips along the way, and we try to see how they retain their zoology knowledge. And it's these little fun things that are really engaging to people. We actually had to turn away people from this because there wasn't enough seats for proper social distancing in that case. Now, leading into kind of the finale of this talk, one of the reasons that I have been so fond of digital conservation education is the fact that it can be used to really help out organizations when they're struggling with in-person activities. The best example of this that is very close to my heart is how the pandemic affected zoos, aquariums, and museums. Something that I talk about quite a bit is the aquarium that I actually used to manage in Dallas was actually permanently shut down by the city because of pandemic-related losses. We shipped animals out, and it was incredibly, incredibly disheartening. And when that happened to me, I realized I didn't want this to happen to any other zoo, aquarium, museum, because you're losing out on this substantial amount of science communication for kids, adults, and everyone. Vancouver Aquarium, thankfully, that's not the one that I managed. They were able to pull through with a private buyer, thankfully. But it got us thinking, how can we help zoos and aquariums and museums through virtual means? And that's when the project that I currently work on, Zoo Life, was born. Essentially, Zoo Life is a virtual zoo using interactive webcams that you've never seen before. You can actually interact with them directly. You can get right up close to tigers and control it. And this idea was that we could use tech for good. We could use the virtual world for good and help keep people engaged, even when they couldn't visit in person. And something that I really want to mention is, as a rural kid from Arkansas, I had a computer, I had the internet, but I couldn't go in person to these places. I would have loved things like this, teaching on Twitch, Zoo Life, etc., to be able to connect me to the natural world. I think about all the kids that we could change with these virtual means. And of course, as a side comment, especially during the pandemic, people that are immunocompromised, I know several of our users on Zoo Life that aren't necessarily able to visit zoos in person currently, and they also benefit from these categories. Ultimately, there's 3 broad topics for why digital conservation education matters and why you should start implementing it if you have not already. One is accessibility. Creating science content on social media platforms can lead to greater access to science that may normally be paywalled. Entertainment. Rather than dry lectures, entertaining virtual means can grab students' attention. It also shows them that, hey, that professor, that scientist is just like me. They're strange like me. They like the weird fandom things like me. And you guys haven't noticed, I'm a little ADHD. They like seeing that in professors. It helps keep their attention, especially if typical lectures weren't able to grab their attention before. I've had students tell me that teaching in this format, being as active as I am moving around my space, helps them stay focused, which helps them retain information. And of course, as the final note, it makes it relatable and approachable, which I say is pretty self-explained. It shows people that science doesn't have to be something that is far-reached. It shows them that there are people just like them behind the science, the conservation news that they're reading, and helps them stay more engaged. Finally, I just want to say, break free of your comfort zones. Of course, don't push yourself. But if you're comfortable going past that zone, don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of what others think. If you have fun with it and you know you're going to reach people with it, become a green tiger on the internet. Make your own character. Start a Twitch channel. Be as strange as you want to be. Be weird and have fun. Because of course, science is weird. Why can't we be as well? And with that, that's the end of my presentation. That QR code will take you to my link tree, but I also have everything listed off to the side for you guys as well.